Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you, the viewing public. You are tuned in to match number 5 of the 2026 staging of the International Reparation Debate Competition. It is truly an honor to be joined today by two teams who will be vying for one of the remaining slots in the octofinals, that is the round of 16 in this competition. These two teams, San Fernando Central Secondary School and CV Bethel Senior High School. Now, of course, there would be no competition for them to vie for if it were not for some really amazing sponsors. And I want to take the opportunity to give them a heartfelt thank you. So, of course, thanks goes out to the University of the West Indies, the Center for Reparation Research, the UE Press, Jade Limited, the University of Hull, and of course our main partner, the Repair campaign. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and for the purposes of this match, I will be your chair judge. And joining me on my panel, we have some very talented individuals, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Matthew Douglas.
All right. Greetings to all. As Ron said, my name is Matthew Douglas. I am so happy to be here. Looking forward to a wonderful debate. All the best to both teams.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And of course, Mr. Decadiego Nelson.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Decardigo Nelson, also serving as a panelist in this debate, and I'm very much looking forward to the substantive contributions of both teams.
Thank you very much. Now, if you've been watching the other matches in round two, you'll realize that we've always had a guest judge, and this time it will be no different. We have joining us on this panel Mia McMorris, researcher, public historian, and junior research fellow from the Center of Reparation Research. I'd like to invite her to introduce herself.
Good morning. I'm really looking forward to this debate. I am sure the students are going to show themselves to the best of their ability, and I can't wait to hear your points.
Indeed, and I'm looking forward to it as well, Mia. So, ladies and gentlemen, the motion governing this round reads as follows. This House believes that government apologies for colonial harms are meaningless without public support for reparations. Again, this House believes that government apologies for colonial harms are meaningless without public support for reparations. Now, the rules governing this debate. At this point in time, the teams that have become experts in the Jade parliamentary format, but for the benefit of the viewing audience, I'm going to repeat it nonetheless. So the first speakers from each team, they'll have 7 minutes to present their case. The second speakers, they will have 6 minutes. And the third and final speaker from each team will have 5 minutes to present their case. It's important to note that the first and last minute of each speech is considered protected time, and during protected time, no points of information are allowed. Outside of protected time, we absolutely welcome points of information. Of course, there'll be no points of information in the reply speech. Of note, there is a period of cross-examination, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear from the teams. We invite the speakers from San Fernando Central to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm your opener. My name is Simone Mitchell.
Good day. My name is Asante Figueroa, and I will be responsible for your bottle.
Good day. My name is Colleen Clagon, and I'm responsible for the closing statement.
San Fernando Central Secondary, to take the stage, the floor is yours, Simone Mitchell.
Honorable Speaker, esteemed members of this House, and to our fellow citizens, good day. Madam Speaker, an apology without action is like saying sorry to someone while keeping your foot on their throat. Words alone cannot repair centuries of exploitation. We therefore accept the motion that government apologies for colonial harms are meaningless without public support for reparations. It is a known fact that an apology without a corresponding change in behavior is a form of covert emotional manipulation. It is a tactical move designed to avoid true accountability, pacify the recipient, and maintain control in a relationship while continuing the same harmful behaviors. Opposition leaders, are you trying to emotionally manipulate our citizens? How are we as a government supposed to run a country solely on lies and manipulation? Take, for example, the case of the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. The United Kingdom eventually issued an apology in 2013 for the atrocities committed, including torture and forced detention. However, it was only after sustained public pressure and calls for reparations that financial compensation was provided to the survivors. This shows that without public support for reparation, apologies risk remaining symbolic gestures rather than instruments of justice. According to the International Center for Transitional Justice, apologies are indeed a form of reparation. They are described as satisfaction for victims, acknowledging facts and accepting responsibility. Yet, these apologies carry meaning only when accompanied by tangible action, that is, financial compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, or other material reparations. Symbolic gestures alone cannot heal generational trauma or repair structural inequalities. We must ask ourselves, what is the point of an apology if the people of a nation resist the very measures that would give it substance? Without public support for reparations, apologies become hollow words, empty performances that fail to deliver justice. They may acknowledge wrongdoing, but they do not correct it, and they do not empower the communities harmed by colonialism. History teaches us that where apologies are linked to real material reparations, they have impact. Victims feel heard, societies reconcile, and governments demonstrate accountability. Where apologies stand alone, divorced from societal will, they are meaningless gestures that risk being exploited for political convenience rather than genuine justice. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was the first speaker from San Fernando Central Secondary School. We now invite the first speaker from CV Bethel Senior High School to open the debate for side opposition. That speaker being Angel Pierce.
Moral leadership is never determined by the loudest voices in a room. It is defined by integrity, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths today. The motion asks you to believe that government apologies for colonial harms are meaningless without public support for reparations. The opposition rejects this outright. Meaning is not dictated by popularity. It is rooted in moral responsibility, recognition of historical injustice, and tangible impact on those affected. Before we continue, it is crucial to clarify key terms. According to Apologies and Reparations in International Law 2010, a government apology is a formal acknowledgement by a state of wrongdoing, often accompanied by reparative action. Moreover, meaningless means something that has no meaning, significance, or purpose, Merriam-Webster. Furthermore, colonial harms are defined as systematic injustice, such as slavery, forced labor, cultural erosion, land dispossession, economic exploitation, and intergenerational inequality, the Dawn Watch 2017. Finally, public support for reparations refers to the widespread citizen backing for financial or structural compensation. In the world today, government sometimes issues apologies for colonial harm, and the public opinion on reparation is often divided. These government issues apologies provide recognition, validate historical suffering, and open the door to further justice. Public opinion on reparations often evolves slowly, but that has never rendered acknowledgement meaningless. The world has already demonstrated that an apology is not casual or symbolic statement. It carries institutional weight and represents the moral and political responsibility of a nation. Before delving into specific points, It is essential to address the flawed assumption settled by the Prime Minister that apology without action is like manipulating our people. We, the opposition, refute this outright. Apologies are our first substantive statement is that the government's apologies is a formal admission of responsibility by the state. During the 1870s, the Canadian government created a school program that entailed removing and isolating the children from the influence of their homes, families, and tradition of abnormal culture. The government at the time believed that this culture was inferior and it was necessary to kill the Indian in the child. Judges, these children faced heinous colonial harms. They were separated from their families, where many were physically, emotionally, and sexually abused. And sadly, over 3,000 students died. For that, they deserve an apology. This apology, issued in 2008 by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, publicly acknowledged cultural destruction and abuse of the indigenous people long before full reparations gained widespread public support. Survivors consistently emphasized that recognition itself was essential to restoring dignity. Unfortunately, 5 schools were left out of the apology in 2008. So, in 2017, former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a formal apology to those group of Indigenous survivors. During this time, one of the survivors, Toby Obed, spoke with tears in his eyes on behalf of the victims. He stated that in 2008, he felt left out, forgotten, and abandoned. Canada has now accepted responsibility for all that we went through. Ladies and gentlemen, for such disgraced colonial harm, these victims simply wanted to be recognized. They simply wanted an apology. So how can we say that an apology is meaningless? Our second substantive is that apologies are the moral backbone of ethical governance because they establish accountability before any further action can take place. When U.S. officials publicly expressed deep regret for the unethical medical experiments conducted in Guatemala in the 1950s, and when former President Barack Obama personally called President Alvaro Colom to ask for forgiveness, the United States was not responding to public pressure for financial reparations. It was drawing a clear ethical line, declaring that those actions were wrong and did not reflect the nation's values or commitment to human dignity. That apology did something crucial. It formally acknowledged wrongdoing at the highest level of state authority. That is ethical governance in action, confronting truth rather than concealing it. Similarly, the 2001 Durban Declaration recognized slavery, the slave trade, and colonialism as crime against humanity on the global stage. That recognition did not depend on unanimous public support for reparation. Instead, it established a moral and legal foundation upon which advocacy and policy reforms could stand. By naming colonialism a crime against humanity, the international community created a framework to validate victims, correct historical records, and lay the groundwork for reparative action. Apologies are not meaningless. They are the right thing to do when wrongdoing has occurred. Mr. Speaker, the government fails to realize that apologies are for the victim and not popularity among its citizens. Reparatory justice is grounded in the moral duty to those harmed. Apologies honor that obligation, which should exist even if public support is weak. At the end of the day, the call for reparatory justice was put in place to help the descendants and survivors gain closure so that they can begin to heal. This should never rely on if public approves of the form of payment. If the motion were accepted, governments would be forced to postpone acknowledgement, victims would remain unrecognized, and history could be rewritten to accommodate convenience rather than truth. Justice cannot wait for comfort. Meaning cannot wait for popularity. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was indeed the first speaker from the team in opposition, CV Bethel Senior High School. Thank you very much, Angel Pierce. At this point in time, we're going to go into that period of cross-examination. In this period, we will invite opposition to pose 3 questions to team proposition. Each question will last 3 minutes, and each question will last 10 seconds, and each answer will last for 45 seconds. It's important to note that for the team asking the question, only one individual may do so, but for the team answering the question, the entire team may chime in to provide a fulsome response. Right, ladies and gentlemen, after we've had that first half, we'll invite proposition, of course, to pose their questions to opposition. And so with that said, we invite CV Bethel Senior High School to pose their first set of questions to the team in proposition.
Explain why moral accountability should depend on public approval rather than historical responsibility.
Could you repeat, please, if possible?
Explain why moral accountability should depend on public approval rather than a historical responsibility.
In practice, governments rarely sustain costly or long-term policies without public backing. So without societal support, reparations would obviously be delayed, diluted, and reversed. So rendering apologies are politically safe, but they remain ineffective.
Most colonial powers apologized decades after decolonization. Do you believe these acknowledgements should never have been made because reparations lacked public support?
So our answer to that would be that colonial harms are not old, but rather that they are ongoing. And generational poverty, underdevelopment, and institutional biases are living consequences that we all have to deal with. Not only that, but stability is not justice. And while marginalized communities may be quiet, the inequality persists beneath the surface, and it will eventually resurface as social unrest.
If victims accept and value the apology, who are you to say it is meaningless?
So our answer to that is moral leadership requires action, not just language. And true leadership would shape public opinion towards justice rather than hiding behind language as symbolism. You cannot stick a knife in my back, apologize for it, while simultaneously still leaving the knife in my back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And San Fernando High School, we now invite you to pose your 3 questions to CV Bethel.
Our first question is, if an apology truly delivers justice on its own, why do affected communities continue to demand reparations decades after those apologies were issued?
They continue. See, apologies are the first step to reparatory justice. That's why we apologize. They continue to demand it because that's the framework. In the CARICOM 10-point plan, it's an apology. Then you go to the other points, which leads to reparatory justice. So the apology was the first step.
Thank you. Our next question is, does the opposition accept that states still benefit economically from colonial exploitation? And if so, why should those benefits not be redistributed?
So could you repeat the question?
Apologies. Does the opposition accept that states still benefit economically from colonial exploitation? And if so, why should those benefits not be redistributed?
the whole notion is that that apologies are meaningless without public support. So they do benefit.
Can you ask it one more time? Sorry.
Does the opposition accept that states still benefit economically from colonial exploitation? And if so, why should those benefits not be redistributed?
But colonial harm, some people don't want money. They want emotional, and but an apology, you get emotional, you get the chance to, victims get a chance to actually, they get a chance to accept what happened to them. They get a chance to actually digest what happened. They heal from the wrong that's been done to them. You can't give someone money who's been hurt for a long period of time, who's been in slavery, who's been through the slave trade, who's been held captive. Money doesn't just solve emotional and mental damage.
And that goes back to my speech where 5 schools were left out of the apology in 2008. And one of the representatives of the school went with tears in his eyes and said that he only wanted an apology. He wanted an apology and for them to recognize the colonial harm that they have done.
Thank you. Our final question is, how does refusing reparations promote reconciliation rather than entrench resentment and distrust?
One more time.
How does refusing reparations promote reconciliation rather than entrench resentment and distrust?
International transitional justice models emphasize that reconciliation could be done with apologies and memorials.
See, apologies are the moral backbone to any ethical governance. The government is in place to do what is right. That's where we have the Durban Declaration that came into effect, that it recognized that slavery was a crime against humanity. So it's the backbone.
And instead, it established a moral and legal foundation that which could help the people stand up against the duty for the victims.
All right. Thank you very much to both teams for that first period of cross-examination. Now, at this point in time, we're going to invite the second speaker from San Fernando Central Secondary School to take the stage. That is Asante Figueroa. Ready when you're ready, Asante.
Mr. Speaker, the opposing side would have us believe that an apology, once spoken by the state, carries inherent power. That belief ignores political reality and historical evidence. The opposition said that reparatory justice is grounded in morality. Apologies fulfill that obligation. However, symbolism without substance offers emotional recognition, but no material relief. Healing cannot occur where economic, social, and structural harm remains untouched. A wound acknowledged by untreated still festers. Governments do not act in a vacuum. Reparations demand legislation, funding, and long-term reform, all of which depend on public consent. When citizens oppose reparative justice, apologies are reduced to political theater, safe statements that cost nothing and change nothing. In that context, apologies protect governments from criticism while preserving the very inequalities they claim to regret. Furthermore, suggest that symbolic acknowledgement alone can address colonial damage is to misunderstand the scale of that damage. Colonialism was not a moment, it was a system. It reshaped economies, erased cultures, and entrenched disadvantage across generations. Justice, therefore, must be structural. Without reparations backed by public support, apologies fail to meet the standard of accountability owed to affected communities. We see this clearly in Belgium, where apologies for colonial violence in the Congo were met with resistance to reparations, weakening trust and stalling reconciliation. Similarly, in Japan, delayed and disputed compensation for wartime abuses continues to cast doubt on the sincerity of official apologies. So let us be honest. Apologies without public backing do not challenge injustice. They manage optics, and justice cannot be built on appearances. Thank you.
All right, and thank you very much. That was the second speaker from San Fernando Central. Now, to extend the debate for Team CV Bethel Senior, we invite their second speaker, Jada Munker.
Words matter. Truth matters. Acknowledgement matters. This House believes that a government apology has intrinsic value, even without public support for reparations. Mr. Speaker, honorable judges, and members of the House, apologies are just an act. The government wants to dismiss apologies as merely acts, but history shows formal acknowledgement often produces real institutional consequences, from shaping legal arguments to reaffirming national education and diplomatic relations. The possibility of insincere apologies does not erase the documented impact of sincere ones. Reparations are not solely financial. To begin, saying that apologies are meaningless falsely inadequate reparations exclusively with money, ignoring broader reparative frameworks. For example, the CARCOM's Reparations Commission defines reparations as a multi-dimensional process, including public apologies, educational reform, cultural rehabilitation, and institutional development, not just financial payments. Sometimes all some people want is an apology and recognition of the harm done. Also, international transitional justice models emphasize symbolic reparations such as apologies and memorials as essential components of healings and reconciliation. By dismissing apologies, the notation dismisses entire categories of justice recognized globally. Declaring apologies meaningless discourage accountability. Moreover, if apologies are deemed meaningless without reparations, governments are encouraged to remain silent rather than accept responsibility. We should judge whenever an apology is meaningful based on how it helps the people who are harmed and whenever it acknowledged the real historical truth, not based on whenever the majority of the public feels comfortable supporting reparations. Judges, if apologies are not meaningless, why do so many countries attempt to avoid issuing formal apologies for colonial harm? History has shown that several countries have issued statements of regrets, but this act is frowned upon by the CARICOM's Reparations Commission, as it declares in the 10-point plan that these statements do not acknowledge what have been committed and represent a refusal to responsibility for such crimes. Only a formal apology will suffice, because recognition of suffering restores dignity and proves moral accountability, regardless of whenever all citizens approve. For example, on the 60th anniversary of the Democratic Republic of the Congo's independence from Belgian colonial rule, King Philip expresses deepest regrets for the wounds of the past in a letter addressed to Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi. This has been hailed as a historic moment, as it is the first time that the Belgian Royal House has publicly acknowledged the devastating legacies of the colonial rule under King Leopold II and successive Belgian governments. While this could signal a genuine willingness to transform Belgium's relations with its colonial past, this will only happen if the country fully confronts and redresses harms. A formal apology is the first step of the CARCOM's Reparations Commission 10-point plan to get reparatory justice for victims and their descendants. This step does require a genuine apology and does not render the apology meaningless. If the public does not support reputations, public opinion is a poor measure of justice. The third substantive of this motion is that the public opinion should not be used as a measuring stick for when one receives justice. If the government had waited for everyone to support women's suffrage, we would have waited much longer for the right to vote. In the early 20th century, many people opposed women's voting rights, but history now shows that those who fought for change were on the right side. Blind public support can become a weapon that strips real living people of their rights and dignity. When popularity overrides principle, entire groups can be silenced. Moreover, the opposition would like to remind the government that majorities do not always protect justice. Sometimes they deny it for those who deserve equal treatment. Apartheid was a system of entrenched racial segregation. It was the law of the land in South Africa from 1948 to 1994. The laws of the system restricted where Black South Africans could live, work, and who they could marry. Despite the social injustice, many people resisted sanitations and humanitarian pressure because they feared economic loss or instability. It took years and sustained pressure that helped bring political reform. Judges, rights are not rewards handed out by public approval. They are guarantees that stand firm, even when unpopular. In conclusion, government apologies for colonial harms are meaningful, even without public support for reparations. They carry moral accountability, validate victims, correct historical narratives, guide national consequence, and embody courageous leadership.
And thank you very much. That was, ladies and gentlemen, the second speaker from CV Bethel Senior High School, Jada Munker. Now, we're going to dive into another period of cross-examination, but this time we will give the starting privilege to San Fernando Central to pose their first question. And so the period of cross-examination begins when you ask your first question, San Fernando.
Our first question is, can the opposition explain how symbolic words repair material losses, such as stolen land, suppressed wages, or denied education?
Can you repeat it, please?
Can the opposition explain how symbolic words repair material losses, such as stolen land, suppressed wages, or denied education?
It is with apologies, reparations are not solely financial. It doesn't restore those which you mentioned, but it does restore emotional, mental, and physical, not physical, but it does restore physical because it helps the victims to cope with what have happened. An apology, once you get an apology, the victims can say the person takes a responsibility for what they have done, so they feel good about themselves.
Our next question is, if apologies are sufficient, why have international justice frameworks consistently paired them with material remedies?
Repeat the question, please.
If apologies are sufficient, why have international justice frameworks consistently paired them with material remedies?
See, this is not the case. Like the first speaker mentioned, with the tribe and the 5 people who were left of the apology, they did not just want material stuff. Sometimes they do, but there's other cases where they didn't.
They never want the repertory financial stability. All they wanted was a apology. Take back to what I said in my first speech when I talked about the 5 schools that were left out of the apology. the representative, Toby Obed, he spoke with tears in his eyes when he said, I felt left out. I felt that I didn't belong. He just wanted an apology. He didn't want money. He didn't want infrastructure. He just wanted to be seen that they knew that they did repertory harm to him.
It's a duty to the people, not the public. The CARICOM's first step is an apology. Not everyone wants to be financially compensated.
Our last question is, how does asking victims to accept an apology without reparations differ from asking them to accept injustice politely?
One more time.
Very detail.
How does asking victims to accept an apology without reparations differ from asking them to accept injustice politely?
See, that's up to the victims. The victims determine whether reparatory justice is sufficient to them or not the public.
We can't say what the victims feel once they went through colonial harm.
See, public opinion is a poor measurement of justice. Apologies are, and public opinion is a poor measurement of justice.
And apologies are the backbone to a financial, to a structure, to the structure.
It's the ethical backbone to governance.
All right, thank you very much. We now invite the second half of this cross-examination period. And in so doing, we ask C.V. Bethel Sr. to pose their questions to San Fernando High.
Does a formal apology not permanently enter the national record as an admission of wrongdoing?
Can you repeat, please?
Does a formal apology not permanently enter the national record as admission of wrongdoing?
Yeah. Apologies with actions are unfortunately merely just acts. And even if you claim that apologies allow nations to close painful chapters and progress, moving forward without repairing damage means preserving inequality. And progress without the needed justice is avoidable.
Is justice only valid if popular?
Sorry, can you repeat, please?
Is justice only valid if it's popular?
Your answer, San Fernando Central? If you like C.V. Bethel to repeat the question.
Yeah, could you please repeat the question again?
Is justice only valid when it's popular? If it's popular.
So public backing is what legitimizes reparations. Yes, we understand that the Atlantic slave trade affected those who were here before us, but we also need to remember that those who are here before us are us, and that without public backing, reparations will always remain diluted. And without support, there will never be a sustainable pathway to justice. Who does justice benefit if not the citizens? Reparations should be of public opinion. You cannot harm me and then decide that my feelings are invalid because you don't think they are.
Thank you. How do you justify the type of reparatory justice is needed if the victims only want accountability?
The opposition may try to frame reparation as dependency creating payments, but reparations should not only include financial handouts, it should also promote social stability, because social stability is the backbone of everything, because human beings are social creatures. Apologies, once again, are symbolic. It's a here instead of a let's try to fix this. And without the needed reparations, we would never be able to progress and move forward as a whole.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes this first period of, rather, the second period of cross-examination. At this point in time, the debate is going to take a 1 minute pause to allow the finishing touches to be placed on those reply speeches, after which we'll invite the opposition reply speaker, followed by the proposition reply speaker. That 1 minute break starts now. All right, at this point in time, we will resume the debate with the reply speaker from CV Bethel, Kenneth Wright.
Mr. Speaker, we agree that material justice matters. The question in this debate is not whether reparations are valuable, it is whether apologies become meaningless without them. History clearly shows that recognition, validation, and legal acknowledgement provide independent forms of harm repairs that victims themselves have repeatedly demanded. Justice is not a single-lane road. Mr. Speaker, government apologies for colonial harms are not empty gestures. They are formal admissions of wrongdoing. When states acknowledge slavery, forced assimilation, land disposition, and cultural erasure, they correct public records and validate the suffering of victims. The 2008 apology to the Indigenous people in Canada by Stephen Harper and the 2013 UK apology to Mau Mau survivors issued by William Hague demonstrated that acknowledgement itself restores dignity and establishes responsibility. Mr. Speaker, apologizing is not created by majority approval. It is created by truth. We simply see this principle in the position of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which mandates that former colonizing nations must take responsibility for the harms of colonizers. For this reason, the Commission firmly rejects mere states of regret because they do not explicitly acknowledge that crimes are committed. For example, King Philip of Belgium expressed deepest regrets for the colonial harm in Congo. Learned listeners, there is a difference between a statement of regret that says, I am sorry this happened to you, whereas a true apology says, I am sorry we did this to you. To dismiss apologies as meaningless is to discourage accountability for wrongdoing. Secondly, apologies are the moral backbone of ethical governance because they establish accountability. The CARICOM's Reparations Commission's 10-point plan identified the formal apology as the first requirement of reparatory justice. Likewise, the 2001 Durban Declaration recognizes slavery and colonialism as crimes against humanity, providing a legal and moral foundation for reparations advocacy. To declare apologies meaningless is to dismiss established principles of international justice. History further demonstrates this truth. When U.S. officials publicly expressed deep regrets for the unethical methods conducted in Guatemala in the 1940s, And when President Barack Obama personally called President Alvaro Collins to ask for forgiveness, the United States was not bound to public moral progress. If justice depended on popularity, women's suffrage, women's suffrage and the dismantling of apartheid would have been indefinitely delayed. Governments exist not merely to echo the loudest voices, but to lead with integrity. Apologies fulfill a duty owed to victims. They acknowledge harm, confront historical truth, and lay the moral groundwork for future reforms, even when reparations remain contested. Justice cannot wait for comfort. Truth cannot wait for consensus. And meaning is not determined by crowd. The government clearly misunderstood the motion. Their frame clearly ignores the victims. And meaning is not determined by the crowd, but by the courage to say, we were wrong. Mr. Speaker, justice begins with truth, not with transactions. Apologies restore dignity, correct history, and establish responsibility, regardless of public inconvenience. If we declare them meaningless, we do not advance reparations. We undermine accountability itself. So therefore, we must oppose the motion.
Thank you very much for concluding the case for side CV Bethel. That was Kenneth Wright. To do so for San Fernando Central Secondary School, we invite their third and final speaker, Colleen Cleghorn.
Honorable Speaker, today we have shown that apologies without public support for reparations are not justice, but they are performance. A government apology without public support for reparation is a promise unfilled. When governments acknowledge colonial harm but fail to secure societal buy-in, there is no pathway to real change. As seen in the United Kingdom's apology for the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, recognition meant little until sustained public and political pressure forced compensation. That is proof that without public support, apologies remain simply symbolic. Public backing is what legitimizes reparations. Financial compensation, land restitution, and policy reform require consent, commitment, and pressure from society. In Australia, apologies to the Aboriginal communities only gained meaning when they were followed by national debates and concrete programs addressing land rights and education. Without that support, apologies risk becoming image polishing exercises rather than tools for justice. Apologies without actions are merely acts. Chaos cannot be met without change. Apologies are meant to acknowledge wrongdoing and repair damage. Distorted economies, damaged education systems, long-term development are just some examples. Can apology fix those deeply rooted sores? The apartheid shows why apologies without real change are meaningless. In South Africa, the end of the apartheid was not treated as something that a simple apology could fix because the harm was structural. People were denied land, education, and economic opportunity for generations. And that is why the country pursued reforms and accountability through processes like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, recognizing that words alone cannot undo systematic damage. The Rwandan genocide further proves that apologies alone are not enough. After the genocide in Rwanda, the international community recognized that words cannot repair the scale of harm caused. So justice and rebuilding were prioritized through mechanisms like the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the Long-Term National Reconstruction for the Damage. Accountability, institutional reform, and social rebuilding were essential because the damage was deep and lasting. We have also demonstrated that tangible reparations are essential for accountability. Colonialism has generational economic and social damage that words alone cannot undo. This is why Japan's apology for wartime forced labor remains contested, because delayed or rather denied reparations strip those apologies of credibility. Finally, apologies without societal backing breed hypocrisy. When governments apologize but citizens resist reparative action, society remains complicit in historical injustice. The backlash following Belgium's apology for colonial atrocities in the Democratic Republic of the Congo shows how reconciliation collapses when words are not matched by will. Honorable Speaker, an apology unsupported by reparations is hollow. The transatlantic slave trade changed the migration patterns of sharks because of how many dead bodies were in the water. Mothers killed their babies because it was better to be free in death than to live a life of bondage. Epigenetics is prevalent in our current generations. True justice demands public support, tangible repair, and collective responsibility. Without these, apologies are empty gestures. But with them, they become the first step toward genuine healing and accountability. Reparations are future-oriented. And that is why we must build what systematic oppression denied us. Because you cannot build a house without its foundations. Thank you.
And thank you very much for concluding the debate, Colleen Cleghorn. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for an interesting match. At this point in time, the judges are going to excuse themselves to another space and return to you shortly with the results of this exchange.
Good evening. University SFCSS. I'm Asante, Shishira, Simon, and Kudi.
And we are here to join the repertory debate because we believe that reparation should not even be a discussion or a debate. That it should be given to all those who have been impacted by the unfortunate reality of slavery. And we are here to show that our past influences our future, and our present depends on our past. Thank you.
Good afternoon, TV Bethel Civic Club. Today's special is reparations. Why? Because true equality is impossible without accountability. Because what was taken must be restored. Because justice delayed is justice denied. Because time does not substitute for what's owed. Because we still face the effects of slavery every day. Because we want to bring justice to the table.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects.
Our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional / international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries, and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There is none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers, that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation, and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization. The teaching of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans today in many classrooms still follows this harmful pattern. When this topic is taught in a banking method that assumes dichotomy between human beings and the world they live in, Freire says an individual is a spectator rather than a recreator. This kind of teaching doesn't empower, it conditions students to fit into a world shaped by oppression rather than resist it. And that is why we say it does more harm than good, because it teaches history in a way that keeps students passive, not engaged. We learn about Oladoye Equiano, we learn his name, we learn that he experienced this and he wrote an account, but do we open the book and study it and analyze it and discuss it with our teachers the way that Israeli schools discuss Elie Wiesel's Night of the Holocaust? The opposition says they want students to learn about the slave trade and the enslavement of a people. And of course, we all want all students across the world to have reverence for this grave and absolutely horrific period of history. And we do this with the intention that learning about it can empower them to challenge the lingering legacies of racism and inequality. However, defending the status quo, which our opposition seeks to uphold and claims offers us more good than harm, will not offer us this. This is not remembrance. This is not reverence. And when you trace this system back to its roots, you realize that this is not our system at all. Accepted.
The fact that students today are not listening about the brutality, but also about the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies, creating empowerment more than harm.
Right. Our issue is not with these topics being taught, but it is the way that they are taught and the way that they are emphasized with regards to all of the other things that are occurring within African history. To continue, our education system was inherited from Britain, a colonial power that had no interest in nurturing Caribbean identity or liberation. And what good can we expect from teaching this topic when we are continuing to do so in England's pedagogical approach? Even worse, as you mentioned, African history is taught in the Americas and Europe as though it began with slavery. From primary school, students are introduced to African people not through the glory of their kingdoms, their intellectual traditions, or their achievements, but through their chains. Why is it so hard for you to name a single black figure whose legacy is not defined by resistance or white oppression? Why is it that we teach about Toussaint and Nani but not Imhotep, Mansa Musa, or Queen Nzinga in the same breath? This should be taught first. And compare this to how the Holocaust is taught in Israeli. This is taken from the Israeli Ministry of Education.
Point of information.
Declined. Children are introduced to the brilliance of their culture first, their thinkers, their faith, and their resilience before they are taught about genocide. Their oppression is contextualized within a legacy of strength, not as the first chapter. If that isn't a pedagogical problem, then what is? When slavery is taught primarily as a story of powerlessness and victimization, with the current banking method of pedagogy, it does more than inform. It deeply affects the psychological development of students, particularly those of the African diaspora. During adolescence, a critical time for identity formation, as described in Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, students are particularly vulnerable to internalizing messages about their race and their place in history. If the dominant narratives they encounter emphasize subjugation or this constant need to fight without also highlighting pre-colonial civilizations and agency, students may inherit a sense of trauma and inferiority. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's 1995 concept of stereotype threat shows that students underperform when they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group, a common experience for Black students navigating a curriculum saturated with ancestral suffering. In classrooms where Black students only encounter these narratives and are rarely offered examples of greatness before colonial times, they are more likely to fear confirming negative stereotypes about Black intellectual inferiority. And yes, this study found that this did significantly reduce their academic performance. In contrast, we argue for emancipatory pedagogy, which views students as active co-creators of knowledge and encourages reflection, dialogue, and transformation. We want students to read and discuss the first accounts, and this should be a mandatory part of the curriculum, not an option. Additionally, students should be first met with pre-colonial history that showcases the richness and strength of Africans from various tribes and kingdoms before delving into the horrors of the slave trade. Through student-centered dialogic approaches, this topic becomes not a detached narrative of victimhood, but a pathway to critical consciousness where students develop an internal locus of control, a sense of pride, and the tools to challenge injustice. When classrooms prioritize empathy, voice, and critical inquiry over memorization, the teaching of the TTEA can become what Freire calls a practice of freedom, not oppression. We are fully justified in arguing that teaching the history of the TTEA causes more harm than good on the basis of the heavily flawed pedagogy. In parliamentary debate, motions like this are evaluated based on the status quo, meaning how things are actually occurring now. As such, the opposition cannot shift the debate by suggesting that in some ideal future it could be taught differently or argue on the basis of the principle. We are debating the present, and the burden is to defend the way that it is taught now. Thank you.
All protocols observed, the opposition remains resolute against the motion. This House believes that the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans causes more harm than good. We in the opposition agree that there are flaws in the method, but we argue that even in its current form, teaching this history does far more good than harm. We accept the definitions posited by the opposition with the exception of the word harm. Harm caused by the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans in this case is more like temporary discomfort that fosters long-term justice awareness and healing. The proposition burden is to prove that the act of teaching this history is inherently harmful, even when taught well, and that these harms are so deep and widespread that they outweigh all educational and social benefits. We must prove that the current approach generates more harm than good, and 2, the harm is not inherent to the method but as a result of poor implementation, and 3, that the teaching of enslaved Africans creates civic awareness, empathy, prevention of recurrence, and general social progress. The status quo, the history of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans is already being taught, but with growing care and impact. Students today are learning not just about the brutality, but also the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies of inequality. Yes, some schools get it wrong. Reform reform is being done for more inclusive, trauma-informed, and empowering education, making it the norm. Mr. Speaker, we are not for the current way of teaching this history. The motion didn't state the current way. We are for the best way of teaching this history. Allow me to rebut. And this best way is trauma-informed teaching. This would be training teachers to handle emotional topics with care, no graphic reenactment, use check-ins, and create safe spaces. This builds resilience instead of re-traumatizing students. And 2, balancing the story. Don't stop at brutality. Teach about African civilization, resistance leaders like Nani of the Marus, and achievements of the African diaspora that restores pride and identity. 3, we would center real voices, use first-hand accounts, African scholars, and cultural sources to humanize the content and shift away from cold textbook trauma and link the past to the present, which will let students reflect through debate, which is already being done, and modern connections to racism and justice. This transforms discomfort into action and purpose, including Black educators. Involve Black voices in teaching is as authenticity, prevents tone deafness, and build trust in diverse classroom. This is credible as the RAN program has a similar approach, and it has proven to be working, as it has a 94% increase in the racial unity and empowerment. Allow me to rebut the misconceptions provided by the government. The government stated that teaching of trafficking of enslaved African causes discomfort and psychological harm. But let me say that discomfort is not harm, Mr. Speaker. And the 2019 UNESCO states that students taught slavery alongside resistance have greater empathy and understanding of justice. And secondly, discomfort is necessary for growth and historical reckoning, just like the Holocaust education or genocide studies. They also stated that the current method does not include the history before slavery. But Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is a big misconception. Most syllabi incorporates the history of the Africans before they were colonized. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Mansa Musa. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Songhai Empire. It is in the rationale also and syllabi that the teachers should use discussions to actually engage the students. In today's debate, I will bring 2 substantive. 1, the current methods build civic awareness, empathy, and critical thinking. And 2, discomfort from learning is not the same as harm. It leads to empowerment. My second speaker will discuss justice and the prevention of repetition in the injustice, while my third speaker will prove why we remain supreme. Our first substantive is the harm lies in the method, not the content. My first warrant is balanced teaching that includes stories of resistance and survival, reduces emotional harm, and builds empathy. When we emphasize both suffering and human dignity in the trafficking of enslaved Africans by teaching resistance, African agency, and survival, we shift from trauma to empowerment. It does more harm than good because it builds pride, resilience, and understanding. For example, the Holocaust education isn't taught by showing only images of death camps. They come with stories of resistance, survival, and moral courage. It fosters pride, empathy, and moral courage instead of guilt or division. That's why balanced trauma-informed teaching benefits are supreme. My second warrant is effective, safe teaching already exists and work. We're seeing programs like Facing History and Ourselves offer concrete evidence that teaching hard history can be both emotionally and safe, intellectually enriching. According to a 2021 RAN Reparation study, students in these programs which is a reform program by the way, show that 94% increase in civic agency, meaning they felt more empowered to take social action and reported deeper empathy, stronger historical understanding, and more open-minded attitude. And the fact that we're seeing this in real classroom, Mr. Speaker, proves that harm is not inherent to the topic. It's about how we design the curriculum and support teachers, and we are currently doing this now to reform. If we have models that work, and we do, then the moral burden shifts to improving delivery, not erasing the content. What my third warrant is suppressing this history causes more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, be aware that we're not talking just about the current history. We're talking about the teaching of the history overall, because that's what the mood says. In environments where slavery is ignored or downplayed, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Students grow up believing that slavery was minor, that racism is just a mere relic of the past, or that systemic inequality is simply an overreaction. This ignorance sustains real-world harm, and contrary to this, we're seeing that countries like Germany, many who have faced their history head on with regards to the Holocaust show lower levels of historical denialism and far-right extremism than those that whitewash. The impact, it promotes social equity and activism, because when students learn this history accurately and empathetically, they become more socially aware, engaged, and ready to challenge injustice. And 2, it empowers empathetic, informed citizens who are empowered to fight modern injustice. And 3, it protects future generations from repeating injustice itself. My second substantive is silence enables racism to thrive. My first warrant is when schools avoid teaching slavery, they leave students with distorted or incomplete narratives. In the absence of formal education, when students are left to piece together understanding from biased media, peer opinions, or online misinformation, the result is a deeply distorted view of race and history. A 2018 SPLC report showed that only 8% of the US high school seniors could identify slavery as the primary cause of the Civil War. When students believe that slavery was a voluntary arrangement or that racism ended in 18
Ladies and gentlemen, the judges are back and we have with us the results. We know which team will be moving on to the octafinals of this competition. The motion before us read, this House believes that government apologies for colonial harms are meaningless without public support for reparation. Now, there's a key term in this motion that we felt like wasn't particularly consistent throughout the debate. That is a matter of public support. See, from Team San Fernando, we got two distinct ideas of what public support is. So first, we got the idea that public support refers to the government's public support for reparation, i.e., the state actor is publicly supporting reparation, and we're saying that apologies without this government state support is meaningless. But we also got within the same team an appreciation that public support is actually the support of the citizenry. That is, the individual citizens that comprise the state. That if the government gives an apology, but the citizens within the state aren't in support of reparations, then the reparation is meaningful. See, these are two different appreciations of what public support means. One centers the support on the government, one centers the support on the citizenry within the state. The judges were unsure which one of these two things San Fernando was debating. But with that said, it never really, yeah, it was an important distinction to make, and we never fully understand San Fernando what your stance was on public support. To CV Bethel's detriment, they never pointed out this flaw either. We think that this is something that is intrinsic to the case that San Fernando is trying to bring, and an inconsistency such as this is one that should have been pointed out. We want to say to CV Bethel. So with that said, we had to weigh the debate as the debate existed. So what do we get? Well, we got in the debate several ideas from San Fernando that there is a general lack of sincerity when it comes to any sort of public apology if it doesn't come with support for reparation. We say that it is akin to them, Simone tells us, being emotionally manipulative. We think that was a very charged and interesting way to enter into the debate, and quite frankly, I enjoyed it. I love that introduction to the debate. This idea that a public apology without actually doing anything is akin to some sort of abusive relationship where you just say you were sorry without making any meaningful attempts to correct the injustice. And that is bad. That is a bad actor. That is a bad state that we do that. We thought that was an interesting start to the debate. We definitely wanted to hear a lot of that idea. Simone, we think you started the debate well. We think you needed to go all the way and use up the allotted time. You had 7 minutes to present a robust case. The case started out interesting. You didn't use very much of your time. And so there's only so much that we could have credited. We heard from Simone the situation with the UK and the Mau Mau people in Kenya, that they did absolutely nothing They apologized, and it wasn't until there were actual reparations action that led to some interesting outcome. I think these are good claims. We want to hear a little bit more of them. But what did we hear then from C.V. Bethel? See, C.V. Bethel starts out, Angel did, and she gives us a two-pronged approach. They say that it validates the individual, C.V. Bethel says, and they gave a brilliant example that was utilized throughout the entire debate of what happened with Canada in 2005 or 8, I believe it was. They spoke about certain injustices that occurred and gave a formal apology, but 5 institutions were left out of that. And for several years, those institutions suffered, not because they never got any material reparation, but because the apology that was given to the other institutions was not proffered to them. See, Angel tells us that in as much as they felt really bad about that, and it wasn't until Trudeau came and gave the apology, I believe in 2017, that that 5 institutions felt something. And it was this little boy or this little individual or individual who came forth and with tears in their eyes, and they said, "It wasn't until I got this apology that I really felt seen and heard." And this was an interesting example to show how an apology can be meaningful. But the example itself would not have been sufficient if Angel didn't go out for us to explain why it is that this person felt this way. See, Angel tells us that when you give that apology, it validates an individual, and that is supremely important, Angel tells us. And they tell us, so that she tells us how it is on the individual. She also tells us how it is on the state. She tells them that it is taking accountability. See, Jada went a little bit further with that question of accountability from Team CV Bethel. And she told us the difference between a statement of a regret and an apology. And Jada told us the intrinsic value of an apology. Jada told us that when you give an apology, it shows that you are presenting moral accountability. It shows that you as a state are doing something that you are regretting and that is supremely important. And we thought that was a very good extension from Angel's case, Jada. Right? What else did we get from the debate? We heard that without a lack of sufficient material, without a lot of material, without reparation, without that physical thing, the reparation just doesn't hit the same way. We hear that an apology without the material reparation, without any good outcome, is meaningless. We heard that from Asante. See, Asante explains to us that in as much as you give an apology, but you don't give me anything behind it, your apology is hollow. But then that goes in direct contradiction and a clash with C.V. Bethel's claim that it is not hollow because it provides intrinsic value and moral accountability. So here now we find a clash of ideas, and the judges love clashes. Asante tells us that it is hollow unless we get economic benefit. CV Bethel telling us that we don't need economic benefit. There is intrinsic value in the apology on the individual and moral responsibility on the state. There is a clash. Unfortunately, again, Asante, San Fernando, there wasn't sufficient warranting out of that mechanism. What about it is so hollow? Asante, you had 6 minutes to present your case, and you never used up all of your time. And so, in the face of the robust argumentation that came from CV Bethel, even though it was a genuine clash, CV Bethel still wins out on that clash because of how much more work they put into presenting their case. The last thing I want to say is that Colleen Cleghorn, we think you are an absolute asset to your team. We think that your work in the cross-examination was beautiful. You did very well in the cross-examination, and we think your reply speech was good, even though it didn't necessarily answer a lot of the things that you hear me crediting CV Bethel for weren't directly answered in your reply speech, Colleen. But nevertheless, Colleen, you were an absolute asset to your team, and you should be proud. So, ladies and gentlemen, from my oral adjudication, I think you can get the assumption of who we think won this debate. The team that won this match did so on 272 points to the team that did not win this match, 262 points. A 10-point difference. In the realm of debating, that is a meaningful distinction. And so, The team that wins this match and will be moving on to the octafinals in opposition, CV Bethel Senior High School. Congratulations, CV Bethel. We see CV Bethel there celebrating and the coach celebrating along with them. Congratulations, team CV Bethel. The best debater from this match comes to us from CV Bethel. And that was, oh yes, please feel free to exchange your comment.
Congratulations, San Fernando Central.
Guys did excellent. It was a great debate.
Yeah,
You were
but
nice
y'all had
opponents.
on our tippy toes.
You were nice opponents. Thank you.
And if I see you expressing something, San Fernando, but you're muted, unfortunately.
Oh my gosh, so sorry about that, guys. So once again, thank you so much to our facilitators, but thank you so much for being wonderful opponents. Thank you so much. You are great debaters, and I wish you the best of luck as you continue and advance in the competition.
Thank you so much. Same to you.
Wonderful. The best debater from this match comes to us from CV Bethel Senior High School, and that was your second speaker, Jada Monker. Jada, you really did a wonderful job of solidifying the voice that came from Angel, and your delivery was beautiful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this match in the International Reparation Debate Competition. Join us at 1 p.m. where Holy Childhood High School faces off against Clarendon College, both teams from Jamaica. The motion, this house believes that multilateral institutions should play a leading role in designing and administering reparation programs. Ladies and gentlemen, until then, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Guys, have a great day.